I've also ended 8 wars in 9 months, and we're working on that final war. It's not easy, but I don't know. I think we're going to get there. 25,000 soldiers, Ukraine, Russia. In the last month, 25,000 soldiers have died. So I think we're getting very close to a deal. We'll find out. I thought that one would have been gone quicker. We did 8. I thought that would have been an easier one, but I think we're making progress.
A new and highly contentious peace draft for ending the Russia-Ukraine war has taken shape, which places strict limits on the future size of Ukraine's armed forces. According to the Financial Times, Ukrainian and U.S. officials have discussed and approved a proposal that would cap Kyiv's peacetime military at 800,000 service members. Even with this restriction, Ukraine would still field the second-largest standing force in Europe, behind Russia, and remain close to its current wartime strength of roughly 900,000 personnel. But the very idea of restricting military size has long been considered a red line for Kyiv, making this proposal politically and strategically sensitive. This follows widespread criticism of an earlier peace plan drafted in Washington. That initial 28-point document suggested limiting Ukraine's military to just 600,000 troops, a number Ukrainian officials argued would leave the country dangerously vulnerable. Following consultations between U.S. and Ukrainian delegations in Geneva, the proposal was condensed to a 19-point framework. However, the full details of the revised plan have not been released publicly. The most contentious issues, especially those dealing with territorial disputes, have been set aside for direct negotiations between U.S. President Donald Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. A U.S. official speaking to CBS News claimed that Ukraine has agreed to the revised document, but Russia's stance remains uncertain. Meanwhile, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said Moscow has not officially received the updated proposal. Still, he warned that the Kremlin would reject any deal failing to meet its long-standing demands. Those demands have consistently included sweeping territorial concessions, including the entirety of the Donbas region that Ukraine calls unacceptable.
As for the Ukrainian issue, we certainly discussed it primarily yesterday in an informal setting. President Putin commented on President Trump's peace plan in detail and quite clearly a few days ago, at the end of last week during a meeting with the permanent members of the Security Council. Our assessments retain their validity in the sense that the fundamental tenets of the Trump plan are predicated upon the understandings that were achieved in Anchorage at the Russian-American summit in August of this year. And these principles are, on the whole, reflected within the plan, something we wholeheartedly welcome. President Putin himself spoke about this because after the Anchorage meeting, when we felt these understandings had already been firmly established, a rather lengthy pause ensued, and now this period of silence has been broken by the official submission of this very document. We do have access to it, but only through entirely unofficial channels. Officially, it has not been handed over to us. But we are ready, naturally, as the President said, to discuss specific wordings, because a whole range of questions there, of course, requires clarification. So far, we have not received from our American colleagues the version that is being speculated about in the media. Those who engage in this megaphone diplomacy, of course, are pursuing anything but honorable goals. They don't even try to hide it. Macron was speaking here just the other day. He stated that Trump's plan is unacceptable because it represents a capitulation to Russia. Others also expressed similar sentiments that everything must depend on Ukraine's wishes, whether to proceed with or reject any given agreement. Well, but serious diplomats discuss such matters as diplomats should, confidentially, until a final agreement is reached. Those who try In the process of comprehending the submitted documents, firstly, they were leaked intentionally to stir up this hype in the media space. And those leading this commotion, they certainly don't hide it. They want to undermine Donald Trump's efforts. They want to twist this plan to suit themselves. As I wanted to say, like in a joke, but decided not to bring it up. So in this regard, we do have channels of communication with our American colleagues. They are being utilized, and we expect from them the version that they will consider an interim one from the perspective of completing the phase of agreeing on this text with the Europeans and the Ukrainians. Then we'll have to take a closer look, because if anything there is censored, the spirit and letter of anchorage, based on those key understandings that we have recorded, then of course this will be a fundamentally different situation. But for now, I repeat, no one has officially conveyed anything to us. As for Belarus's participation, Belarus very actively participated in these efforts. And when the Minsk agreements were finally reached, following almost 20 hours of intense negotiations among the leaders of Russia, Ukraine, France, and Germany, President Lukashenko personally made a tremendous effort to organize this entire undertaking in such a way that it would ultimately conclude successfully.
From Washington, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt acknowledged that the plan still contains what she described as delicate but not insurmountable details requiring further trilateral negotiations between the U.S., Ukraine, and Russia.
So the president remains hopeful and optimistic that a deal can be struck. And I think he deserves a great amount of credit for the extensive amount of time and energy he has put into solving this war. He wants to see the killing end. He wants this war to end. And his frustration grows out of the frustration of the American people. You know, President Trump stopped the funding of this war, but the United States is still sending or selling a big amount of weapons to NATO. We cannot do that forever. And the president wants this war to end. He is a peacetime president. That's what he's pursuing. And today he remains optimistic and hopeful. And I know our teams are working around the clock to try to get this deal to an end.
Meanwhile, Kyiv has not publicly confirmed accepting any limits on the size of its armed forces. Interestingly, the proposed cap of 800,000 troops mirrors an earlier counter-proposal reportedly floated by the UK, France, and Germany in response to the original US draft. The final version of the peace plan remains uncertain, especially as Washington continues fresh talks with both Kyiv and Moscow in Abu Dhabi. It's worth noting that President Trump campaigned on bringing the Russia-Ukraine war to a rapid conclusion, but nearly 10 months into his term, a breakthrough remains elusive. Moscow continues to reject a ceasefire and insists on territorial changes Kyiv refuses to accept. As negotiations continue, it remains to be seen if the latest peace talks are just another stalled attempt to end a war now approaching its fourth year.